Battle of Agincourt. Quite honestly, this is, as Dr. Kicklighter said, and by the way, thank you for allowing me to speak to the class today. I certainly appreciate that. I so seldom get up here lately. I haven't done a brown bag since January, so I get a little edgy if I don't have a audience. So anyway, the fact is, this is a key battle in history. It certainly is very important. It features the English king Henry V, who has raised an army to become a fight against the French nobles, okay? Not against Charles VI, because he's crazy. So there's a problem there. Well, it's going to be, the key piece here is it's going to be a French defeat by a very inferior force of Englishmen. And this resonates tremendously with the English, okay? I mean, even, like you saw Henry V, you saw at popular prices, by the way, you saw that, that movie was made in 1944. There's a reason that movie is made in 1944, because this resonates with the English people, okay? That this was a key victory, the little guys beat the big guys, that's kind of the issue here. And of course, it's made very, very famous in 1599, by the way. So that's almost 200 years later, by William Shakespeare in the play Henry V, which has indeed the very famous St. Crispin's Day speech, which includes a phrase that resonates with us today, band of brothers. So that's a little bit of what the background is. And I'm going to spend some of this lecture, a lot of it's really coming from a famous military historian, I believe probably one of the greatest of the 20th century, and that's John Keegan. And John Keegan would look at this battle and say that this inspired thousands of, or who knows how many, English schoolboys, okay? This really resonates in England, particularly during World War II and after that generation, maybe not so much now. But the fact is they really looked at this thing as, this was, yes, we were bad. But John Keegan will also point out, too, that medieval battles were less than pretty, more like a slaughterhouse and, some basically war crimes, what we would see today. So medieval battles were pretty messy. All right, so what's this going to really be about? And we see England, and you see a red line, and that's the path across the English Channel that Henry V is going to take to get to Harfleur. Now, notice that that's a very similar location to where we invaded in 1944, because it's right by Normandy there. So, indeed, that seems to be a regular pathway. Now, he's got an army of 12,000 men, and their plan is he's going to land by Harfleur, actually on the 13th of August of 1415. And then what he's going to do is he's going to quickly take Harfleur. He's going to march to Paris and capture Paris, and then he's going to march to Bordeaux. Well, things don't always go the way you plan them to do. So, but that was the idea. And he also issues a challenge to the French king, Charles VI. Well, Charles VI is mad, so he can't really accept the challenge. So the French are going to have a coalition of French nobles to try to raise an army to counter this English army that's there. It's going to be primarily from Burgundy and Orleans, the two families that Dr. Kicklighter just talked about. Well, things again didn't go quite the way he wanted. So he's trying to take Harfleur, and I think in a couple of days. Well, unfortunately, he doesn't take it until September 22nd. And by the time September 22nd rolls around, you've got the situation where the season of campaigning is quickly coming to an end. Another big problem is he's had a lot of casualties taking Harfleur. He lost a quarter of his army, primarily to illness, but he's now down to 9,000 men. this is a problem. Maybe we shouldn't try to take Paris. So, what are we going to do? Well, we can put a garrison in Harfleur and go back to England, but probably a lot of people that paid for this thing aren't going to be real happy with that. So, maybe what we could do is we could kind of march along the English Channel on the French coast there and kind of make a demonstration and then make a stop off at Calais, and we'll call it a campaign. Well, that's what he's going to do. He's going to try to basically have this demonstration with this 9,000 man army. Well, all this is going on until September 22nd. The French coalition of nobles has been gathering an army at Rhone. And this army is getting larger by the day. And they begin to shadow Henry V as he heads up towards the Somme. Well, he tries to cross the Somme, but there's French on the other side, so he can't cross. So now he's got to head east. As you can see on the map, he's heading east there. And finally, he can get across the river. But all this is taking time, and all of this is costing a lot of problems with his army. They're now marched a couple of 100 miles. By the way, his army has almost no food. The peasant aspect of his army, which we'll talk about in detail, they're basically living on nuts and whatever they can scrape up in the forest. And they got another little problem. They're suffering major cases of dysentery. So now we've got this army of Henry V. He's got three problems. Everybody's tired from marching a couple 100 miles. Everybody is basically starving, and people are sick with dysentery, and now we got to fight a major battle. That's not a good plan in any case at all, but that's how this is going to go down. And now let's try that. And now we've got, what do we got for troops? So the English army at this time has about 1,500 men at arms. It has about 7,000 archers equipped with the longbow, and it has virtually no cavalry. The French army that they're going to be opposed by has 10,000 men at arms. It has approximately 5,500 archers, many of them being crossbowmen, and it has 600 to 800 cavalry. So you can see there's a huge discrepancy in forces here. Simply enough, though, these people are relatively armed the same way. Okay, so let's look at this kind of like in the classes. Okay, so men at arms are basically well-to-do or royalty. They have armor, they have, swords, they have pikes, they have, whatever, that kind of stuff, battle axe perhaps. And they're well-to-do. They can afford armor, for example. Cavalry is what we think of as knights in the round table. They're riding on a horse, and the horse is armor, and their big suit of armor, and they're carrying a big, lance or whatever. And then we have the archers. Well, the archers are basically peasants. So there's an issue there with these archers, except for some of the French people that are crossbowmen, they are mercenaries. So that's all very similar stuff, but it takes a lot of money to be a man at arms because you have to have a suit of armor in order to fight like this. And the armor comes in different categories. If you got a real lot of money, you've got steel plate armor. And steel plate armor is really darn good about stopping an arrow. If you don't have that much money, you've got probably wrought iron armor and chain mail, which is basically, you've seen little links on people's arms. And that is going to be less capable of stopping an arrow, which is one of the key parts of this battle. And I just want to make notation here of this picture. I love this picture because it just makes me laugh, because believe me, They did not shoot arrows at each other from 20 feet away. That's not how this went down. Okay, so but I love these kind of depictions. They're funny to me. So this is going to be why this battle is fought the way it is. It's simply because two things. The terrain is critical here, and the nature of warfare in this time. So let's talk a little bit about the terrain first of all. Please note the map. At the top of the map, you'll see it says Road to Calais. If you see the blue, that is the French army, and they are in three major lines of men-at-arms. I'll get to why in a minute. The red is Henry V's army. It only has one line because he's only got 1,500 men-at-arms. But notice, too, that he has deployed his archers along the sides. Now, what is this terrain? The green is heavy, thick forest. So both sides, so this is like a slot. And the slot is only 950 yards wide. So it's very small. Also, it's a plowed field, freshly plowed. And it's been raining a lot. So guess what? That field is a big, muddy mess. Now, I got 60 pounds of armor on me, and I'm going to try to like attack somebody going through a muddy mess. This is not going to be particularly easy, and it's going to be a huge problem. So that's another key piece here. So again, very compact, very muddy, big, big problem. And the problem for the French is they've got too many troops for the size of the area. They can't get around behind the English and envelop them because of the two forests. It also makes their cavalry much less effective. So you've got two big problems here for the French. Now, if we think about this, though, do the French have to go to Calais? No, they don't have to go to Calais. Do the English need to go to Calais? Are the English running out of food? Are they in big problems? Yes, they are. So the issue should be is the French have no reason to attack the English, really. But they make a big mistake. And that's the simplest way I can put it. And we'll talk more about command and control here. But Henry V has to get to Calais. And he's going to have to find a way to do it. And he will do that. So warfare at this time is basically based on chivalry. Okay? And chivalry, and it's influenced by class. We talked a little bit about, the archers are peasants and everybody else. And Dr. Kicklighter has said many times in lectures that the clergy prays, the nobility fights, and the peasants, well, they work. And quite honestly, they also fight at some times, but not the way that the nobles do. We'll see that. So we have a very, very different class piece here going into this battle. And so chivalry and oddities of fighting at this time. I think it's very strange that what you would do is if you captured noble prisoners, you would hold them for ransom. Hey, I can make a profit on this deal. This is a good deal. Okay, let's capture a lot of people and we can basically get some money. Last example, Battle of Poitiers. The French king, John II, is captured. And the English decide to hold him for ransom. And they've got a really big ransom they want. They want a lot of money for John II. And the French go, you know what? He's not worth that much. Why don't you just keep him? And John II is so chivalrous, he could leave, all right? But he decides, well, they didn't ransom me, so I'm going to stay. I mean, think about that. That's pretty amazing to me. But so this is pretty amazing to me, too. But anyway, that just goes to the idea of chivalry and how you could capture somebody and, make a profit. And that's going to be key to this battle as well. Another key piece of this battle is I'm a man at arms, and there's another man at arms across from me, and I whoop him, you know? I get a lot of status. Now, I'm a big shot now because I beat him in single combat. So I get status from that as well. All part of chivalry. And what happens in this battle is it's believed that the French are so overconfident. They get this much bigger army, and the English are sick and weak, and they're no big deal. And you know what? We got 5,500 archers. Let's not use them. They might kill people that we could hold for ransom. So we're not going to use the arrows. No arrows in this attack. We're going to basically capture those English, and we're going to hold them for ransom, make a profit on the deal. To me, this is insanity, but that's the thinking at this time. And, so you got all these issues with people. But again, the nobility here, these people were trained to fight at an early age. That's what they did. They were fighters. That's what their job was. They would get up in the morning and go to sword practice, and the other people, though, are not quite the same. And we'll talk about that. But it costs a lot of money to do this. All right. You couldn't just be, off the street, because you needed that. You needed that suit of armor. And suits of armor are very, very important. And they're actually quite well designed. Now, again, if you had a lot of money, you got steel. If you don't have a lot of money, you got chainmail and iron. But I want you to look at this picture. Notice that circle I have around his neck. And there's like a collar thing there. What is the function of that? Is that if an arrow hits you in the breastplate and then ricochets upward, that thing deflects that arrow away from your neck and your head. So these things were actually quite well designed and totally custom made. You couldn't go and buy your suit of armor off the rack. So that wasn't happening. But again, and if you got too much weight, you had to get a new suit of armor. Ask Henry the Eighth. Anyway, now, what's the archers? Oh my, I don't see any armor. Yeah, well, guess what? They're peasants. They can't afford armor. So that's a huge problem for them. Because what happens is, if you've got cavalry and you see a bunch of archers, you send the cavalry to go attack the archers, and they'll rout them because they have no basic. Once you get on top of them, they're defenseless. So that's kind of the point there. So another key piece of this battle, and this is the most famous piece of this battle, it's always said that the English longbow was the key weapon here because it would penetrate French armor, and that annihilated the French knights. I don't necessarily agree with that. I would say modern tests of armor and English longbows copies have pretty much shown that the steel plate armor was virtually invulnerable to arrows, even at pretty close range. The wrought iron armor, not so much at close range, but yet long range, it would still protect you from arrows. So much so that it's believed that these people didn't even carry shields. They didn't feel they needed a shield because their armor was so good. So if it's not the longbow and the arrow, though the longbow and arrow has been incredibly important in this battle, as we'll see. The English longbow was the dominant weapon at this time for 200 years. It was approximately 6 feet tall, and it was made from yew. Now, how do we know that? Because when they raised the sunken English ship, the Mary Rose, there were a bunch of longbows on it. So they took those longbows and could actually see what a longbow really was at that time. And they found out that the longbow has an incredibly heavy draw weight. So the amount of effort it takes to pull that thing back and let that arrow go is incredibly heavy. The smallest one they found was 100 pounds. They found bows that were up to 180 pounds. So that means you'd have to if they're going to do it like this, you'd have to pull 180 pounds back. Couldn't do it that way. So what they did do was this. They would take that bow, they would notch the arrow, they would hold it by their head, and then they'd lean into it. And then they'd raise up and fire the arrow, because that's the only way you could draw that bow back, because it had so much draw weight. So, how do these peasants become archers? Well, simply enough, it was encouraged by the English. So there would be contests, for example, with prizes to learn how, so people would start learning how to use the longbow very, very young age because it was something that was encouraged to do. Now, you've already probably seen the movie Robin Hood, and Robin Hood shoots the arrow and he splits it in half. Well, the upper class didn't do that, okay? They weren't shooting arrows, but they were too busy practicing swords and pikes. So, but these people did. So they would have these contests. And by the way, probably would be a good way to put a little extra food on the table too, if you've got that longbow going. And so there's been all this idea goes with this, why this was capable. And it was a very capable weapon because quite honestly, it fired different types of arrows. And the top, these 180-pound bows had a range of 330 yards. Now, at 330 yards, you've lost a lot of velocity. So it's not going to penetrate armor. And also, you certainly aren't going to be aiming at a little target at 330 yards with a bow. Or maybe if you have a scope on it. But they do have that much range. Now, is that effective range? Absolutely not. Well, let's talk just a little more about this bow. So a trained bowman is capable of firing 7 arrows a minute. And that will also tire you out quite quickly, so they can't sustain this fire. Another piece is they would carry 25 to 30 arrows. And what they would do with those arrows is they'd stick them in the ground. It wasn't coming out of a quiver. They'd pull them up off the ground and then fire that arrow. Well, let's do the math here. You got 7,000 archers, 25 to 30 arrows per guy. You've got 200,000 arrows that you can fire in that little tiny area where the Battle of Agincourt is going to take place. So 200,000 arrows, that's a lot of arrows in a very compact area. Like I said, though, that there's a problem with being an archer because you're not armored, you don't have the protection, you don't have a sword. You're basically out on your own. So if cavalry comes, what do? You're in trouble. The British come up with an idea. They take stakes and drive them into the ground with mallets. Then they sharpen the stakes and they use that like a hedge. It's not a continuous line, but probably more like a checkerboard. And they hide behind that to shoot their arrows at cavalry coming. Now, cavalry, we always see, the movies, they're always galloping at full speed. That's not really how they operated. They operated at a trot. And basically a trot is about 15 to 18 miles an hour. So if the effective range of a longbow is 220 yards, they can fire 3 arrows the time it takes those cavalry to get to you. But if the cavalry can't get to you because you're behind a bunch of stakes, guess what? They're not effective. So that's critical to what will occur at this battle, if I ever get this thing off. Now, let's talk about the battle itself. Thought we'd never get there, right? But anyway, the way the battle went was simple enough. Henry realizes that he can't possibly break through all that French forces. He doesn't have the combat power to do that. His only options are 2. He can retreat, which gets him no closer to Calais, believe me, or he can goad the French into attacking him. So how's he going to do that? Well, the 2 armies originally are about 600 yards apart. And Henry thinks to himself, well, let's move up 300 yards. So he tells his archers to pull up all their stakes. He takes his men at arms, remember they're in one line across the battlefield, and he begins to move them forward 300 yards. Why does he move them under 300 yards? Because that puts them into the French into range of his longbows. So moves 300 yards. They begin to hammer the stakes in again, sharpen the stakes, all this preparation. Now, if I was the French and if I wanted to attack, that was the moment because they don't have those stakes in the ground. They're not organized, and their men at arms have just moved forward. They're not organized. This is the time when the French could have won this battle probably easily. They don't do that. Why they don't do that, no one knows for sure, but I would say because they have a complete lack of command and control because of the way they're structured. They don't have one leader. They have a loose conglomeration of families that don't even like each other, put it that way. I mean, so there's nobody really running this thing on the French side in overall control, unlike Henry V. And we'll talk a little more about that. So they move forward and they launch a flight of two of arrows at the French. The French get aggravated and they decide, okay, we're going for it. So they launch their cavalry at the archers, which they should. And the first rank, remember there's three ranks, the first rank of men at arms begin to march forward across that muddy field, 300 yards, in heavy armor to get to the English. Well, what happens, of course, to the knights on their horses, the cavalry, they can't get at the bowmen, the archers, because they're behind these stakes. They can't get at them, and they're just getting arrows shot at them. So they decide, well, we're going to retreat. But according to John Keegan, horses at this time were only armored in the front. The horses are beginning to take hits in the flanks and in the back. And so now you've got horses that are injured running wild on this narrow little battlefield, and they begin to run into the French men at arms that are advancing and disrupts that advance by injured horses. So that's a huge problem, okay? Because they got enough problems with the mud. And now these guys that are marching forward, the men at arms, the first rank, they're getting pelted with arrows. So they put down their visors, and now that does two things. It limits their vision. They can't see well. And another big issue is they're not breathing well either. So now they're getting more and more tired through this mud. And they said it was basically up to their knees slugging through this slot. I'm not sure if that's quite accurate, but that's the reports. And if I'm out there and I'm getting pelted with arrows, guess what? I'm going to try to pick up my pace and I'm going to try to get out of this and get to where I need to be to fighting as quick as I can. Well, that's going to exhaust me even more because now I'm basically running as best I can to get ahead. And that's going, so by the time they get to the English line, who are just standing there, they're not tired. Okay, come on down. We're ready to fight. And they get there and they're tired. Okay, they're exhausted from this mess of mud and arrows and running, and it's just a disaster area. But they do push the line back. The English line gets pushed back a bit. But people are starting to fall. And when you fall in this suit of armor in the mud, you can't even get up because you're tired. And there's cases of people actually suffocate from being in the mud with a suit of armor on. That's not a good way to go, it seems to me. But, so you get more and more compact. Well, at this point, what probably should have happened is the French should have said, this isn't going well. Let's back off and wait for the English to attack us. That would have been a good plan. They do the absolute worst thing they can do. They send the second line in, and the second line crashes into the first line and begins to press them into the English. So now these people are like, they can't even fight because they're like so compacted. that it's just becoming more and more of this mess. And this goes on for approximately 3 hours. But before the third hour comes along, another huge thing happens. All those 7,000 archers are now out of arrows. It doesn't take long to get through 30 arrows. So guess what? They decide they're going to join the fight. They come out from behind the stakes using whatever weapons they have, which are mallets that they use to drive in the stakes, or a knife, or a club, or whatever they can find, and they attack the French first and second lines from the sides and from the rear, making it more compressed. Now, again, if the French had quality command and control, what you should have done is you should have taken the remnants of your cavalry and sent them out immediately to attack those archers who are now really defenseless. But did the French do that? Absolutely not. So now we've got more and more problems, and guess what's going to happen? Well, French are going to start to surrender. And the English are more than willing to accept their surrender, because guess what? I can ransom this guy. He's worth some money. Okay. And so they start to take more and more prisoners. And what is going on at this point is, now Henry is looking at what's going on in the battle. He's not fighting in the front ranks right now. He's looking around. He goes, uh-oh, well, there's still a whole line of French men-at-arms out in front of me. There's French cavalry, there's French archers, and I've been fighting for 3 hours, and my men are tired. And by the way, we're now intermingled with all these prisoners. And then another thing happens. A small group of French knights have gone in behind Henry's forces and have attacked his baggage train. They happen to have with them several hundred, as I've heard, as much as 600 peasants are accompanying these few knights to go attack the baggage train, which is like their supplies and their supply wagons. And the peasants, I'm sure, are thinking, oh, this is a good deal. We're going to get some free stuff. Okay. So they jump into the battle, and they're going to, so Henry's looking at this around, and he goes, well, let's see, I got men-at-arms in front of me, I got cavalry in front of me, I'm intermingled with prisoners that could pick up weapons and start fighting again. And oh, by the way, now my rear has been attacked by a bunch of knights and peasants. He's a little concerned about this. So he makes the decision, kill the prisoners. Now that says medieval warfare to me, just got to kill them all. So, of course, his men, they don't really want to kill the prisoners. They want to make a profit. And it's really brutal. I mean, what's been going on here? I mean, knights are on the ground, and, peasant archers are beating them over the head with mallets, and they're basically trying to find when they're in the ground, they can't get up. They're finding little places with knives to try to stab them through their armor, find a place in the armor where there's a gap. So it's pretty brutal fighting. And now they're going to kill the prisoners. Well, again, don't really want to kill the prisoners, but John Keegan believes this really wasn't intentional to kill all the prisoners, because there's a lot of prisoners. Perhaps it was just an idea that would terrorize the French prisoners, so if things did get out of hand, they wouldn't start picking up weapons and fighting again. So no one will ever know, but that's the theory that John Keegan has. Well, French never attack. It is amazing to me, but the French basically allow the archers to come out, never send in their cavalry, never use their archers, never, basically their third line of men-at-arms never get involved. They never attack. They had an opportunity, I would say, to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat at least 2 times in this battle. even if they mishandle the battle badly. But again, what do? They just withdraw. Henry's like, cool. This is great. And so, well, no reason to kill the prisoners. We don't need to do that. Let's, okay. Well, so when we really look at this battle, and we look at command and control in warfare at this time, it's what I would call heroic leadership. The most famous heroic leader, of course, is Alexander the Great. So let's look at Henry. All right, Henry V, he organizes his army, but once the battle starts, he's in the front rank with a sword or with a pike or something, fighting. He's not running the battle. He's fighting, like a regular soldier. And the only thing he's providing that time is moral support to his military. Hey, the king's out there fighting, let's, go for it. And so at least he provides that. And a good plan initially. And the decision, of course, later on when the battle had settled down, he begins to exert control again. We never see any of that from the French. The French never really take control of this battle. They basically meander through it. I don't know what they were thinking about half the time, what's going on. I don't think really anybody was in control for the French. Again, because there's no centralized command. They are basically just separate groups doing whatever they wanted to do at that time. And so the defeat of the French is primarily because of lack of command and lack of control of their forces. I think the most important reason that the English win this battle is because of the actions of the archers after they abandon their out arrows and they join the fight. And the fact that the French don't react to this. I don't believe that it's the fact that English arrows were so good against armor that they penetrated the armor and that killed the knights. Don't believe that at all. I know that goes contrary to what many believe about this battle, but that's my opinion. I think this battle was fought because of a better action by basically their peasants, okay? And jumping in, 3 peasants attacking one knight, you knock them down and beat them over the head with a mallet. I mean, it's ugly, but that's kind of what it does. Well, for France, this battle is absolutely catastrophic. Perhaps 6,000 French men in armor killed in this battle. This is the cream of French society. One historian says, the casualties read like a roll call of the military and political leaders of the past generation. 90 to 120 great lords are killed in this battle. This is the leadership of France, of their great houses. Whole families of knights are wiped out in this battle. And as far as the people that were captured, the numbers go from perhaps 700 to 2,200 people were captured by the English. It is an absolute complete disaster for French nobility. Estimated casualties for the English, I've heard as low as 600 and higher than a little over 2,000. Number I see most of the time is about 1,600. So they had 1,600 killed in this battle. Very few major lords, only 3 actually. And so Henry V, French march away. The road to Calais is open. He organizes his troops. He gathers up the prisoners and marches them off into Calais. And when they get to Calais, Henry says, well, I think I'm going to head back to England. And he arrives back in London on November 23rd, and it's a gigantic triumph. What he has done, he's created the legitimacy of the Lancastrian dynasty. Remember, somebody said Dad was the U word. So, and you know what? Dad was the U word. But regardless, so Henry now has created the legitimacy of their dynasty of the Lancastrians. And he's created that legitimacy not just in England, but internationally as well. They are the kings of England now after this battle. And as far as the French go, they're in chaos. Their leadership is in absolute chaos because of the casualties and the problems with the Orleans and the Burgundians. So much so that 10 days after this battle, the Burgundians march on Paris to impose their will on the French government. And so you see, this is going to lead to major, major advantages for the English down the road, which Dr. Kicklighter will talk about next week. So thank you all for coming and hope you enjoyed the presentation.